Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today I am talking to Dr. Patrick MacManaway, and this is the first of hopefully a series of chats on all sorts of topics. We're going to come up with all sorts of wonderful things to hopefully interest, surprise, amaze, and delight you. So without further ado, let's get started. Hello, Patrick.
Saira, hello.
It's really lovely to be talking to you again. So we're going to start by kicking off with blessings, aren't we?
We are going to talk about blessings, and the reason to have this as our first, in no particular order, but I think the issue of blessing and the issue of simple, universal, unconditional love, which sits inside of and is completely autonomous with a blessing, is really the most foundational thing for everybody in their life at all times, under any circumstance, whatever we're confronting, whether it's the dishes or our relationship or our work or project.
I've basically been taught and have come to really understand over the years I've been doing this work that love, just unconditional love, underpins energy of the universe. So this is really what you're tapping into when you talk about this.
It's both the big and small picture, I think, Saira. And it's a completely fundamental primary principle, and so it literally is within all things. We could speak about love in so many ways. One of the ways that has been very helpful for me to really anchor specific and grounded understandings about both the experience of unconditional love and the grace state, and also the application of it, is with research into the resonance of the heart and brain when we're in different states of consciousness. And often this is applied in biofeedback systems, where people learn through some point of reference how fast or slow their heartbeat is, or various different measurements. But two avenues of research have very much informed me. One, the research from Max McCabe and Jeff Blondell in the 1780s with their mind mirror, and they were able to look at the different beta, alpha, theta, and delta frequencies through an encephalographic machine, and then they looked to see which frequencies were active on which side of the brain. And they had what they described, I think, state 5, which was a very interesting and particular state, unromantically named. But it was a state where the person being monitored achieved what's called bilateral hemispheric symmetry. So both sides, left and right side of the brain, were fully awake and engaged at all levels. It wasn't just a dream state, it wasn't just a thinking state, it was a totally integrated state of global awareness and presence, I think would be another way to sort of frame and reference it. And they looked at folk on the street, they looked at healers, they looked at dowsers, they looked at yogis, and they found that this, what I would call a grace state, what they call state 5, was really the key to energy transfer, miracles, healing, interspecies communication, telepathy, psychokinesis, all the things that we're interested in achieving as art in our life. And very interestingly, during the healing process, and I happen to know about this because my father was one of the healers that they studied when they were doing this work.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they'd observe would be that the healer first would go into this grey state, the state 5, as evidenced by their brain function. And then the person that was the healee would what we call phase in train. So being in the presence of that stable grey state, they entrained into their own grey state, and that showed up in their mind mirror reading. And then during that period of time, for as long as that was held, the actual healing happened, as it were, whatever that was of the day, of the moment. And then once the process was complete, the healee would come out of that state, and then the healer would sort of disconnect and come out themselves, and cup of tea, and
Yeah.
and the end of that.
So one has to achieve the state. It pulls the other into entrainment or resonance, and that's when the magic happens, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And another piece of biofeedback that I found tremendously exciting and helpful to use and to share comes from HeartMath Institute, who are in Colorado, and market software that will work on any computer program. They've also got handheld devices. The interactive computer software I enjoy most. But they're looking at coherence expressed in the interval between the heartbeats. There's something called beat-to-beat variability. So your heart doesn't actually tick along at however many beats per second like a clock. It actually goes skip, hop, skip, because it slows down when we breathe in, it speeds up when we breathe out, the pressure in the thorax around it changes. It has its own variability. So if you measure a heartbeat, it's almost like looking at a dance step.
That's rather lovely.
It is lovely. It is lovely. The Lord of the Dance.
Yeah.
The dance of life. It's so fundamental in our thinking and our. So
it's joyful as well.
The heart's not marching; it's skipping and bouncing.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
So what they do is they measure the proportions between the intervals, and then they graph that on a scale. And the more golden ratio proportion that's present, the more it speaks to our being in this grey state. And in fact, when the heart's fully in a golden ratio harmonic, the mind is too. You can measure either heart or brain in this regard. If you're looking for golden ratio harmonic, that seems to be completely co-equivalent with the ability to do telepathy, psychokinesis, healing, all the things that Max Cade had in state 5. It's easier software to use. It's more accessible to the public. I think it's measuring the same thing. Maybe not 100%, but it's covering the same central sweet spot.
Yeah. So this is something people can purchase? It's
a purchase software application. I think depending on the version you buy, sort of $50 to $300. So depending on the depth of your pocket, and you can do it without it. Obviously, we can do this over a cup of tea or sitting in the garden. We don't need any artificial aids. But I mentioned both of those specifically because it references the fact that the grey state is not just an experienced state of mind, it's actually a measurable state of electrophysiology that we can literally measure with home-based software at any time we want. So it's a great...
Sorry.
No, go.
I was going to say, how would, if you can't afford the software or you're that way inclined, how would you achieve this state of grace?
Right.
Without?
without the usefulness of the laptop or the mind mirror.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's what we're really
Technology. How did they used to do it before we had technology? That might be a better way of putting it, mightn't it?
So, so the state that we're talking about, the grey state, it seems to come as a sort of complex. When you're in that space, a number of related things happen automatically, almost like loading software on our technology. And so when we're in or near to in, I think it's a sliding scale. We don't want to think enlightenment or despair. It's sliding scale, and it rises and falls during the day, depending how we place our attention on it. But when we're in that space, we experience clarity, we experience peace. We tend to be in a gratitudinal attitude of mind. We find natural strength and courage. Into that comes inspiration, and with all that comes effortless connection to everything else. And so we tend to find ourselves in those lovely chains of flow and synchronicity where everything we need comes to hand at the moment that we need it, and opportunity and connection and meeting and conversation all just is like ripples in a pond, because there's just no obstruction to the pathways of our intention and the movements of our soul and mind. So so that's the state that unconditional love lives in. And that's the state that gratitude lives in. And one of my publications is called Keys to Grace. And it's looking at specifically what are the easiest ways for a human being like you and me in the middle of a working day to get into that space.
Yeah. It's actually from that space, as you've just said, so much flows and so much magic happens. So the more we can cultivate that space, the more this grace comes into our life, and the synchronicity and the flow of things and the access to abundance, basically, life's abundance.
I think it's the absolute number one. If we're in here, everything kind of works either beautifully or muddles along one way or another. If we're not in this space, it's a bad hair day, best get back to bed.
Yeah.
Or you do more harm than it's already been created. So it's the most basic thing. I know of people who start saying thank you before they get out of bed. So they say thank you the first time their foot hits the floor in the morning. However you do that, but things go well when we're at least in a working state of grace. I'm inclined to be perfectionist, and I know very well that the perfect is the enemy of the good. And so a good enough grace state to get through your day and feel like you were glad you were alive, I think is plenty, without necessarily having to be a cosmically enlightened master to and for all people under all circumstances. So so the unconditional love, the simple love, is in the grace state. Now I think the blessing then, what we're doing is we're projecting unconditional love towards another being, whether that's a human being or a tree being or a glass of water or a glass of wine we're about to drink, or a friend or a project or a business or a landscape. And so I think the unconditional love holds that resonance that the other thing can then entrain to, just exactly in that same way. Max Cade found with the healers. So by projecting pure love, the other thing receives it. I think the pure love is rocket fuel for all living systems. but I think that because it's central to the unfolding of a grace state, when we unconditionally love another thing, it allows or supports or facilitates that thing to find its own natural state of grace and being. And then, you know, either that'll feel better if it's a client, and that'll all be good. If it's a friend or a family member, they'll be much more pleasant to spend time with. If it's a co-worker, it'll all go much better, 9 to 5. So there's really no lose. Now, a very critical and important point just to make for the audience. I know you're very fully aware of this, Sarah, is the ethic of when we project at or to other things or people. And as far as I can tell, the ethical edge between sort of white and black magic, as it were, magic just meaning seeking to create and manifest things through our intention and awareness, is whether or not we compromise another person's free will. And so my understanding and my belief, and to date my experience, is that there's no ethic ever about sending pure, unintentional love.
Yeah.
So at any time of day or night, I can send Sarah Salmon unconditional love in the belief that that can and will do nothing other than support her own grace state.
Yeah.
To the extent that she chooses to be in one. Because I'm not placing any intention on it. Yeah. And so I'm not in any way seeking to change your mind or your dress sense or your in the world. Or,
so there's no conditionality at all.
There's no conditionality. And we've got more and more words for this, I think. Compassionate witness is a nice word. Unconditional mindful, positive mindful awareness, and every system or religion's got their own word for what it is, but that's because it's an important thing, and so everybody's got a name for it. So I think that that's always fine, and I think it would be a sad thing if people felt unpermitted to simply love, because I think that's our fundamental nature, and I think it's what makes the world go round, at least our world go round. It also establishes a carrier wave of resonance between things and people, which then I think allows clear communication. And so I would separate and distinguish the projection of unconditional love as being truly a blessing, of simply a witnessing and holding love around a thing that it might be more truly and beautifully itself in its most thriving and wonderful way. And then beyond that, distinctly, but ideally across that carrier wave of love, if it does occur, is communication specifically, which it can either be asking questions of the thing, as we would in a divination or a dowsing or some process like that, or setting an intention or request of a particular desire, or ideally within those two, communication, conversation, or dialogue to bring understanding and cooperation between those things. But once we're into that level, ethical constraints occur. Yeah, there's something contractual happening, whether or not there's money attached. There's energy and karma attached. Yeah, and we somehow become part of that system, and we do that all the time, and it's good to do that. We just need to hold, I think, a sense of intentional, focused, proactive or reactive behavior versus pure, simple, unconditional loving witness. And ideally, the unconditional loving witness we kind of want always, all the time, without interaction based on conversations, communications, need, or request.
Wonderful. So
that's what I have to say about all of that.
So it's really quite straightforward. It's just maintain a state of grace, of loving awareness, and unconditional love. Project it out there. Give it freely to whoever, whatever. Bless your glass of water, bless your cup of tea, bless your food, bless the world around you. And yeah, it's going to open up the pathways for better levels of communication, understanding, and I would say health as well.
I believe so.
You and others, yeah.
Health in relationship, health in attitude, health in connection.
Very beautiful.
Another really important thing, Sarah, just sort of looping back to the earlier beginning part of the conversation. We're told that God is love in traditions that speak of that, and it's clear that this is a fundamental understanding in all spiritual and esoteric traditions. And I think a thing that we can specifically read and draw from this is the sacred. There's a nice definition of sacred, comes from my tree farmer friend Steve, who understands love and organic systems very deeply. His assertion is that the sacred is something that energizes a system without itself becoming deplete. So it's like a wellspring or a fountain.
Yes.
And I think that love is a multiplier. It sort of snowballs. Once you get it in there and working right, it makes more of itself. This is true of all energies, I think. But it proliferates, it substantiates, it extends itself, it spins off, it spirals off. It's fractal in nature. And so we can expend ourselves and tire ourselves out and deplete ourselves by overextending our force of will to fulfill our intentions on particular projects. And we do that often and it can feel good. We run the race, we put the miles in, we expend and exhaust ourselves, and then we feel like we're glad we did that, we're pleased with the result. But that's very different from the blessing of unconditional love, because as you mentioned, when you do that, it fills you with itself and it multiplies itself, and it's an infinite source both from inside and outside of us, because it's soul sourced, it's sort of open network, ultimate infinite chi. People talk about the 0 point field, or Plato talked about the ether. There's an unlimited amount of this stuff. It's not going away. It's just circulating around like water or air. And so there's no personal depletion of practicing blessings. We can, as we said, we can deplete ourselves by pursuing intentions, but at the level of pure blessing, we actually enliven ourselves as well as, so where it's a sacred enhancement of the system with no downside.
Yeah, and that is potentially actually a way that if somebody says, well, how do I know if I'm, in this state? That's a way of maybe judging it, is that because it does, you feel expanded and uplifted and energized and just full of life, and you can almost feel something shining from you, can't you?
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
If it doesn't feel good, you're not doing it right.
Absolutely.
If it feels good, you're doing it just perfectly.
Oh, that's a fantastic note to end on, isn't it? Thank you so much, Patrick.
It's been a pleasure.
So interesting.
All right.
We'll join you again very, very shortly for whatever we come up with next. Thank you.
All right. And all blessings to everybody watching.
Blessings to you too.